So one of the characteristics of Asian people still in modern society is this emphasis on the family. And one thing that you brought up was that in San Francisco you live near your parents.
Mm-hmm.
You don't live in the same house?
No, that's that's like, I think there's one of the valuable things like in this type of conversation, right, with girls, especially ones you just met, is the push and the pull. So if we establish areas where there's a commonality, I think it's also important to identify the areas where there's a contrast and a difference. So quite individualistic, independent. I moved out right when I graduated high school when I was 18. It wasn't even a choice. It was like, all right, son, time to go make your way in the world. Yeah. And I did, and I lived elsewhere for the better part of 5 years before coming back. But no, I never, I mean, brief stints of crashing on the couch at the house, but never really like formally.
I would come in the summer, but usually if I wasn't working, my dad would start saying, you should start paying rent. Yeah. So even though they were very Confucian and could hardly speak English very well at that time, my dad, this is part of, I think he understood this part of being a man growing up to become independent. One of the issues that they're facing here in Singapore is that there's an economic disincentive to moving out before you're 35, because you cannot purchase reasonably priced property, what is called HDB here, until you're 35, or you're married.
Right.
And there's also a cultural disincentive because it's frowned upon by many Confucian families, that it's almost like an insult to the family that you would leave and rent a place on your own.
That's a big point of contrast I found with the girls I dated, like in China, is that it's just sort of beyond their conception of why would you move out when you're 18, or like,
right.
It never really entered their mind as a possibility. Where I think a more American mindset is like 18 is sort of that waypoint where you become a man, so to speak. Even if in hindsight I didn't know that much when I was 18, but I did go out and live on my own.
Did you stay in the same, when you were 18, did you move out of the city?
Yeah, I moved from San Francisco to Los Angeles.
Oh, okay, right.
And straight away.
I moved from Toronto to Montreal. So that's, I think one of the reasons, so these girls I was dating in Beijing who didn't live with their parents would first, if their parents are in Beijing, they'd first do schooling outside of Beijing and then come back. Mm-hmm. But at that time they've already set a precedent, which is that they don't live at home and their parents are used to that. So they get their own place. In fact, so that's interesting.
Stop trying.
Like, wow, are we starting a love story here?
I did want to mention one other thing that I've noticed about Asian girls, and this is more in the category of like tools you can use. I've noticed that like if you go to LA, if you go to Miami, who's been to the States here? Anybody? A couple of you guys? It's a pretty physical culture, especially in like LA, Miami, maybe New York. Sort of a flesh culture, and some of the places wear really revealing clothing, and it's totally normal to be like really physical and stuff. I found that that's really not so much the case in many places I visited in Asia, and so I do adapt parts of my approach to reflect that. And here's 2 takeaways that I found. The first is, instead of, as a sort of analogy, red light, green light, instead of looking for green lights, I just keep an eye out for the absence of red lights, right? So what I'm actually talking about is if I'm touching and doing something as we're talking, I'm just making sure that she doesn't either visibly, recoil or pull away or push my hand off or say stop. And I start to take it now as the absence of a red light is as good as a green light. Whereas in the States, right, it's much more common if I'm starting to be a little physical that she's into me, she'll start to show it back and reciprocate. And I find that doesn't happen as much here. So the second thing is the sort of adaptation I found to that seems to work is sitting down or getting somewhere where I can either put like a jacket or something over us, or we're sort of hidden under a table, and then hold hands out of sight. And so if we were sitting here and you guys couldn't see, but if I was doing like massaging this pressure point on the hand while we're talking, but it's under the table and I'm aware that nobody else can see, and she's not recoiling, even if she's not taking my other hand and rubbing it, then that's actually making progress on the physical progression side. So I think becoming a little bit more discreet. Tell me, I mean, have you found that as well?
Yeah, discretion is that much more important.
Definitely not like a public display of affection culture, from my experience at least. Maybe there's something with like, white and Asian versus Asian and Asian, but I found that being like discreet pays quite a bit more over here than back
Yeah,
home.
definitely. Well, you were saying about the coat, you could do that with blankets or just and pretty much anything. Like if you're at a movie theater and like a gold class, you get the little blankets. You can throw that over
Right.
and do lots of different
If you're
things.
in a club, I've done it with a pillow,
Oh yeah,
whatever
right.
it is.
Or like
Just,
a lounge place.
yeah, being more discreet and
And you can
getting-
actually verbalize it. Like you could tell her, look, no one's looking, and you can go in and peek it, do a little peck,
Yeah.
and then pull away, and then like no one's looking again. So, and it creates this little bit of excitement. For her.
Yeah, the other one is, if you don't mind standing up for a second, is like, especially if it's a little bit louder, I've used this as like a good cover of just like, what was that? Come here. And just lean in.
Oh yeah,
and
right.
oscillate between leaning in and talking into the ear, and then pulling out a little bit slower each time, then looking in the eyes and continuing the conversation,
Right.
and then coming back in. And as I'm doing it also, I'll either like grab a belt hoop or put my hand around her hip or on her waist and pull her in a little bit closer. Ideally, I want her leaning into me more than, because I'm taller, I don't want to be like doing the woodpecker.
Yeah.
So that's something else that I sort of focus on when I'm out and about Asia.
Yeah. Well, one thing, what I was trying to get to with the family and is that how many of you guys are living with your parents still?
I'm 36, I'm still staying with my parents.
Okay.
Really?
Yeah, because it's so expensive to get a place. To get even a government house, single, you can't get brand new. And you have to buy off a resale, a second-hand market. And on the average, you're looking at about Sing dollars, looking at about 350 to 400 grand. 400,000.
You can't rent in Singapore?
You can rent, but it is quite expensive as well. From a condo, approximately about $800 for a room, to a HDB flat, which is going to cost you about $500 for a room, thereabouts. And then
Okay, let's hold on. Now, how much did you pay for rent last year while you were at Berkeley? What did you pay there?
I was paying $925 a month.
U.S. dollars.
U.S.
How much is that in Singapore dollars?
Probably $1,100.
Okay, great. When I was in the average rent in Toronto for if you get your own room and you got a 2-bedroom that you're sharing, it's probably $1,000. You're lucky if it's 1,000.
Now that's like right near campus, not in a dorm, but in a shared house
Right.
with 1 or 2 other people. I have my own room near campus, and it's actually partially subsidized by school.
Oh.
When I was living in San Francisco, when I was pre-school as an investment banker, I was paying $2,000 for a 1-bedroom, and it wasn't even, that was far from the high end, right?
Wow.
It's
Okay.
expensive.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I thought it was absolutely worth it to be working out and making money in order to have that place to myself, and I kept it, nice, and ended up serving me well for bringing people back there and having a destination to go to that was my own.
Right. It's an important part of lifestyle, which we're going to get to in a second. So I'm just trying to get it. It's a long-term fix. I mean, for a lot of these guys, there's a cultural barrier, I think, to the idea of paying $500 a month, which is like, give me a break, dude. To using that, and it's been like months. I literally am harping on this for months and months. When I was 17, I left the house. I left my parents and I went to do my own thing. And the dorms are subsidized, so those are reasonable. And the parents are also kind of looking at that as a package. So that some Asian parents will usually cover tuition and room and board. But then once you're renting on your own, you're in the market. And my sister in New York, she was at Columbia. When she was renting from Columbia, it was this beautiful place right across from the gate, and she was paying $1,500. And then when she finally had to go out on her own, she was sharing a 2-bedroom. She was sharing a walk-up on the 6th floor, which is horrible when I was visiting. I had to carry all my luggage up 6 floors. And it was $2,000 per person for a place that hardly had, there was another person living in the living room. So they didn't even have a proper living room. But that's New York, right? And they're all paying like $2,000.
That's definitely expensive.
Well, yeah.
Like there in San Fran, top of the.
Well, they were like 2 blocks from MoMA. Oh no, from the Met. So it was a nice location. But this is so Singapore's expensive, but it's not like exorbitant. Especially if you're a Singaporean and you can rent an HDB flat. What is
HDB?
What does that stand for?
Housing Development Board.
I got
It's
it.
the government
So
body
government apartment.
Yeah, government.
It's very heavily subsidized.
Is your place HDB?
Yeah.
I don't know why they have this sort of definition that HDB, they're all really nice apartments, but then as soon as it's not HDB, they call it a condo, right? And then suddenly it's like three times the price.
It's privately owned.
It doesn't make any sense. But
I have a feeling the ones on the other side of the gate are HDB.
Yeah, exactly. They're actually very nice. They just don't have the swimming pool,
Yeah.
the gym.
Right, they don't have the facilities.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you, do you have any advice for guys who still live at home with their mom for logistics?
Well, it's harder for me to. It's not my first-hand experience.
But
what I would say is, God, that's a tough one.
what would you say to a guy in America who has that situation?
If he's living with his parents,
Yeah.
he would probably be pretty young. In which case, I'd tell him, go get a place. Let's get some friends together and go. That's my first piece of advice. If you're going out and if you're going for like a same night thing, I mean, if you're financially able, a hotel is always a good option. Be ready and or willing to drop whatever 100 or so,
Or 2 or 3.
or if you're going out to Clark Key, like 250 to go to Novotel or something, which I've been that guy. Yeah, I pulled to Novotel and I didn't bring my ID, and that ended up being a huge logistical pain in the ass because I had to convince them to let me a room with no ID. I was like, look, here's the cash. Here, give me a key. And I had to make a scene. But then they finally checked me in, and everything went well. But
That's
not doing that.
She was there while you were doing that.
I was like, go sit over there, go check your Facebook or whatever.
Oh, right.
let me sort this out.
Oh, that's a secret.
Like, go post something nice on my wall and give me a minute.
Putting it on Facebook,
Lay the hand
you
down.
can spend a long time just lost in that world.
It took about 20 minutes. I'm like 3
Nice.
people. And then you finally
So
went
that's another tangent I want to come. So let's go to the lifestyle issue now, because you're one of the people that people should look up to for this. And one character trait that I've noticed that we addressed in yesterday's class for the Singaporean, the average Singaporean guy, is that he obeys orders and rules and regulations. One character trait that I'm encouraging them to develop is being more assertive and adventurous. Put those two together. And so let's go to this example. What was going through your mind when you realized that the rule is you must have ID because as a foreigner or anybody, they need to have a record in case the government decides to check on them. What were you thinking at that point about?
just on the Novotel?
Yeah, take that example.
Yeah, I mean, so this will tell you a little bit more about me. Like, I was not going to take no for an answer, right? I had just spent 2 hours trying to, seduce this girl and got her to leave the club and actually got her to come with me to 7-Eleven and buy condoms, which she later told me was really embarrassing for her. And so I'm coming into this with initially a low threshold of cultural sensitivity. But for my sort of, maybe in some ways it makes me like a typical American, which I'm totally open to that possibility. But in my mind was like, there is a way to make this happen, and I'm going to find it, even if it offends some people's cultural sensibilities. I guess, to be very specific, at that moment, my desire to take that girl upstairs overruled my normal willingness to adapt to whatever culture I'm in. And so I just was more overbearing and aggressive and assertive than was probably acceptable.
Yeah, you just weren't going to take no for an answer, and you knew that there was some way to make this work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe, and maybe it's, I don't know, American truism, but we have a saying, where there's a will, there's a way. And I had a strong will at that moment, and I knew that I was going to find a way to make it happen. And I had a plan B too, which I, scouted out a less comfortable place, in some not in a room. But that was my fallback that I didn't want to revert to.
Right. Right. So one of the points I want to bring up is that it's not an Asian. It's not an Asian tradition to be to just be a yes man. So let's take the example of guanxi, which you mentioned before, which is connections, and they're a very specific type of connection. The fact that there exists guanxi and that you can get business done almost sometimes only with connections is showing that there are no hard and fast rules. Everything can be bent depending on who you know. Mm-hmm. So the elite in Asia, and the elite, like, take for example Kangxi Emperor, he can bend all the rules because he's the fucking emperor.
No, he makes the rules.
Yeah, right. So the Asian elite have this monopoly over the culture. They determine what you will say, what you will think, which has been amazing. Like Lee Kuan Yew and the way that he's created a nation and a national, like a national identity, has been amazing. And
his book is next on my to-read list because he really fascinates me more and more.
Yeah, he's super smart. And one of the things that they do is that the elite in Asia, whereas in America it's a lot more spread out. So I'd say, as far as women go, maybe the top 10% of guys in America are, sleeping with 90% or so. I would say, and then those 90% though obviously can't all marry them, so they marry these guys who aren't getting it. Right? But then in Asia, it's something like 3% and 97%. Because it's so concentrated at the top. Mm-hmm. These guys break the rules, and no one ever knows.
Mm-hmm. My understanding, just from observation and a little bit of reading on guanxi, is that it was sort of born out of a more rigid, bureaucratic society that was more, say, authoritarian, and there was more strict rules and punishments. So having a network of informal relationships was a way to slide in between the cracks and get things done that otherwise may not be possible, contrasted with really liberal, open, different structured type of society, like say we're in Europe or the States perhaps.
Right.
So that's been my observation.
Yeah. So this came up at our last infield, where we had a big infield night at Butter Factory, where they have a tradition or a practice of having a super long queue outside when the club inside is empty. And one thing I found that the newer guys didn't realize is they should never get in the regular line, which stretches out like 100, well, at least 50 to 70 people, and it takes an hour to get through. It's almost like lining up at Disney World. Or,
it's a joy kill.
Yeah. So it does matter in terms of getting women. I mean, if you just play according to the rules, the 3% will continue to have sex with all the girls that you're eventually going to try to marry.
So even that little ping of everybody that's in line watching us just roll in, that's a bump in value. And it's not, whether or not you can get yourself on the VIP list, maybe you get a bunch of friends and pitch in and do bottle service or something. But stacking the cards in your favor goes a long way before going out. If you just go out and you don't have a plan and you're bar hopping and you end up in a line, it's going to bring your state down. It's going to put a damper on the night. It's not going to be a deal killer by any stretch, but the opposite is much better, right? To come out, have a plan, roll up, look like a player, go straight into the club, say what's up to all the doormen, and then you're inside. And as other people filter in, you'll be like, oh, you finally made it in. Awesome. Here, meet my friends.